Welcome to the review for the first lesson in confirmation on the first commandment. What we're going to be covering tonight is going to be three things. First, we're going to be talking about the story that we learned from Daniel chapter 3 about King Nebuchadnezzar and his giant golden statue. Number two, we're going to be talking about how idols are not just statues. More often, they are ideas, and it's important for us to know that. And three, anything can be an idol, which is why it's so important for us to learn this first commandment so that we can identify what an idol is and keep ourselves from breaking it. Okay, so let's get right in. We're going to start with the story. A long time ago, there were many Jews who lived in Babylon. This was after they had lost their homeland in a war, and many of them were carried off to live in a foreign city. But even though they lived a long way away from home and their temple was destroyed, the Jews still worshipped God. One of the important things that God taught them was that they were not supposed to worship idols, images, or depictions of other gods. The first commandment said, "Do not worship anyone or anything but God alone." Now in Babylon there was a king named Nebuchadnezzar. He was a terrible man. He was completely obsessed with himself and believed that he was so great that people should worship him like a god. In order to prove that point, he had a giant golden statue of himself built. It was 100 feet tall and 10 feet wide and completely made of gold. He then ordered all of the important people in his kingdom to come and bow down and worship this golden statue. He also ordered that if anyone refused, they would be thrown into a furnace and burned to death. There were 3 Jews among the leaders he commanded to worship this statue, named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. However, these 3 were good Jews who remembered the first commandment, "Do not worship idols." They refused to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue. The king was not happy about this. In fact, he was furious. These 3 were refusing to agree that he was such a great man that he deserved to be worshipped like a god. The king brought them in front of him and told them he would be gracious and merciful to give them one more chance to worship the golden statue. If they refused again, he would have them thrown into the furnace. And the 3 refused. They even said, "Even if God won't save us from the fire, we will not bow down. God alone is God." So the king, absolutely furious now, had the furnace turned up 7 times its normal heat and had them thrown in. What happened next amazed the king. He saw the 3 weren't burned, and it looked like there was a 4th person in the furnace with them. He called them out, and they didn't even smell like smoke. The 3 were freed, and they never had to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's stupid statue. In the Old Testament, there were idols all the time. In Exodus 32, the Israelites constructed a golden calf idol to worship it as the God who brought them out of Egypt. The Canaanites in Joshua and Judges, as well as Queen Jezebel in the Book of Kings, worshipped Baal using statues. The Philistines in 1 Samuel worshipped a god named Dagon, whose idol kept falling down in front of the Ark of the Covenant in 1 Samuel chapter 5. Idols were carved images or statues of gods, and people would equate the presence of a god with the presence of their statue. We also heard about a giant idol in our story from Daniel 3. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't just build a ridiculous statue, he built an idol. It was an object that was worshipped, and it wasn't God. This story is all about idols and how there is a temptation to worship them just because everyone else does, or because there is a danger in not doing so. Remember how Nebuchadnezzar threatened to throw people in a furnace. This story reminds us that we can stand firm against idols. However, idols are not just statues. If they were, then we would never have to worry about idols anymore, because who worships statues? Instead, we know that idols are what Martin Luther said about them. A god is the term for that to which we are to look for all good and in which we are to find refuge in all need. Anything on which your heart relies and depends, I say, that is really your God. We can see that it's not just something we worship in the sense of going to church, singing hymns, saying prayers, and listening to sermons about. What makes an idol is how you treat it and how important it is to you. Think about King Nebuchadnezzar again. The obvious idol was the giant statue he built to himself and commanded everyone to bow down and worship. There was, however, another idol in the story. The king was making his ego, his own sense of self-importance, into an idol. He worshipped his own self, thinking he was what the people ought to depend on, and not God. This is where idols get tricky, because they become things you can't necessarily touch. Martin Luther claimed that money and property were the world's most common idols. People rely on and trust their money to take care of them, as if having enough of it will save them from sickness, pain, suffering, and perhaps even death. They will go to great lengths to get money and property, and they will make bad things happen to people who might keep them from getting more money and property. The same could be said of any idol. It's anything we trust in to give us what we need, those things that God gives us, and makes us willing to harm others, whether physically, emotionally, socially, or however, in order to get it. An idol is anything we treat the way we should treat God. Another way to put it is to ask yourself, if God were to ask you to give something up, how quickly would you say no? And the level to which you say no, that also would tell you a little bit whether that's an idol of yours or not. When we start expecting things to give us happiness or hope or certainty, safety, security, that's when we are starting to treat them like gods. So how does this affect the real world? How does this first commandment affect us in the real world? Well, first and foremost, idols hurt people. The story of King Nebuchadnezzar shows that in a really obvious way. The king demands that everyone worship this statue, a stand-in for himself, or else they'll be burned alive. He even follows through on the threat with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they refuse to worship the king's idol. When we worship an idol rather than God, we become willing to hurt others, directly or indirectly, in service to that idol. Imagine a popular kid who has turned their popularity into an idol. They feel safe and secure in being popular. They imagine that the way everyone looks to them for advice on what's cool, the way everyone races to be the first to like their Instagram post or their TikTok video, or the way they can get anyone they want to date them will make them happy. Remember Luther's definition of an idol. Anything on which your heart relies and depends. What happens when their popularity gets threatened by a new kid who seems pretty cool? Their first reaction might be to make sure this new kid doesn't take away any of their popularity. They might get their friends and followers to turn against this new kid. They might spread rumors to hurt the new kid's reputation. They might even get into fights if they feel threatened enough. Why would they do this? Because they expect their popularity is the thing that will make them feel safe, secure, and happy. If someone takes that away, like this new kid, they won't have that feeling anymore. When our idols are threatened, we become willing to harm other people. Idols distract us from trusting in God. God invites us and calls us to love our neighbors, share the abundance of goodness that God gives us, live humbly, and serve others. By worshiping God, we do the opposite of hurting people, because God doesn't need us to hurt anyone on God's behalf. An idol can't defend itself, so it needs us to do that for it. But it's more, because an idol is just a thing. It can't give us anything. It can only take. God can actually do the things that God promises. It's important to know how to identify an idol because of what it can make us do to others. If we trust a thing more than God, we will always be disappointed by that thing. It can't give us anything. It can't satisfy our hopes. It certainly can't keep us safe or bring us life. God gives us this commandment: I am the Lord. You shall have no other gods before me. When we follow that commandment, it makes us more able to care for our neighbors. It makes us less willing to hurt others. And it makes us better able to serve God and make the gospel known in the world.